guys, this video is going to be a tutorial for reading sheet music, the basics of reading sheet music. I think it's a valuable skill to have. And some of the tutorials I do, like the ragtime ones, it will be beneficial to be able to follow along. So you don't have to rely completely on the tutorials. If you get stuck or tripped up, you can reference the sheet music. And a disclaimer is that this is in no way an attempt to even begin to scratch the surface of sight reading, which is a completely different skill set and an art unto itself. Requires a lot of dedication and practice, and I have not developed that skill. Sight reading is when you see a piece for the first time and you can play through it completely just by reading it. I cannot do that. It takes me a long time to read a piece, and I have to go measure by measure slowly, but I can usually get through like scores that aren't too complex. So that's that. And another thing is that I've taught myself. I'm self-taught with regards to reading and playing by reading it about it and viewing various videos. So we're gonna begin. For the purposes of teaching, I'm going to use this rag by Joplin called Peacherine Rag. As you can see, it's not marked up. So, I'm going to begin with this here. You see these grouping of lines and spaces with notes on them. And you see two groupings of lines and spaces joined together by this symbol here, this squiggly thing. When two of these are joined together, it's called the grand staff. So it's usually the treble clef, which is this symbol here. This ornate S or F looking hybrid thing here. This is the treble symbol for the treble clef. This one that looks like an ear with two dots, that's the bass clef. And each one has their own layout of lines and space notes. So these spaces here are not the same as those, so you'll have to memorize both of them separately. And then next to that, you'll see three things that look like B's. Those are called flats, and that's where the key signature goes. It'll either be sharps or flats or nothing. And then next to that, you see a 2 and a 4. That's the time signature. That lets you know how the notes and rhythms are going to be divided in each measure. Measures are divided by these lines here, vertical lines. As you can see here. Okay, so they're divided according to this time signature here. And what you have to know about the time signatures is that the top number is how many beats are in one measure or bar. Those terms are interchangeable. And the bottom is which note is going to equal one beat. So in this case, there are two beats in a bar. And the quarter note is going to be one beat. That's what the 4 is. So if you know fractions, you know that if there were 2 beats in this bar, then there would have to be 2 quarter notes, because a quarter note is equal to 1 beat and there's 2 of them, so 2 quarter notes would fill out this measure. But if you're going to divide the beats further using other notes, this is what you would get. You would get 2 eighth notes equal a quarter note. As over here, for example, 2 eighth notes is 1 quarter note, so that's 1 beat. And 4 16th notes would equal a quarter note. 2 16th notes would equal 1 eighth note, so on. So it's just simple fractions. So you see here 4 16th notes, that equals a quarter note, that's 1 beat. 2 eighth notes equals a quarter note, that's 1 beat. So that 2 beats, this measure is complete. Same thing in the bass clef. Okay, and what I'll do now is I'll draw out the basic notes that you will see. These are the most common notes you'll see. The whole note is just a circle. Half note is a circle with a stem. Quarter note is a filled in circle with a stem. Eighth note, filled in circle, stem, 1 flag. 16th note, filled in circle, stem, 2 flags. And the more flags you add, 32nd note would be 3 flags, 64th note would be 4 flags, and so on. But these are the most common here. Okay, so now there are different ways to draw them. If you have a grouping of them, instead of drawing each one individually with the flags, what you could do is you can join them together with vertical, you could join a group of them together with these vertical lines you see here, and how many lines there are would correspond to what type of note it is. For example, these 2 lines here signify a 16th note, which has 2 flags, and this one line here is an 8th note. And usually you only would join them together starting with 8th notes. You wouldn't do that with quarter notes. Quarter notes would be drawn individually. Okay, and with regards to how you draw them, or how they would appear in the music, the rationale behind that is anything, any note, for example, the circle of the note drawn on the 3rd line. If it's right on the 3rd line, the stem can go up or down. Anything above the 3rd line has to come down, and anything below the 3rd line has to go up. And when you're drawing them up, stem is on the right side. When you're drawing them down, stem is on the left side. Okay, so that's when the stems go up, when they go down. Now, if there's a grouping of them, and it's going to be the majority rule, so if the majority of them have to go in one direction, that's the direction they're going to go in, even if one of them has to, or the minority of them have to go in the opposite direction. It doesn't matter, the majority is going to rule. So if you see, like, let's say these 3 had to come down and this one had to go up, they're all going to come down because majority rules again. So that's the rule there. Okay, now, as I mentioned, those are the type of notes. Most common type, that's the way to draw the stem. When they're going up, stem on the right, coming down, stem on the left. Flags here. Flags here. When they're going down. Now. Okay, so now I'm going to get into, I'll focus on this, the time signature for right now. So, as I mentioned, how many beats per bar, which note is 1 beat. So here, how would you go about counting a measure? For 16th notes, it'd be 1, E, and So that's just the way to verbally count them out. 1, then the letter E, plus sign meaning and then an A for 8th notes would just be 1 and 2 and. Quarter notes would just be 1, 2. Whole note would be 1, 2. Half note 1, 2. Because a half note would be 2 beats. Okay, so this measure here would be 1 E and 2 and that measure would be done. Same thing here. 1 E and 2 and. Okay, this one here would be 1. This would be and 2 E and sorry, it would be 1 E and 2 E and Okay, my bad there. This would be 1 and 2 E and that one right there. Okay, and so forth. This would be 1 and 2 and. For eighth notes, this one would be 1 E and 2 E and So basically what that counting out does, it helps you to know what the rhythm's going to be and how it's going to sound. Okay, so you can count out a whole piece like that. I'll do one more example. This one here. And see how these single notes are coming down. The groupings of chords here, these are chords when notes are stacked on top of one another, as opposed to a melody like this that goes horizontally. These, so again, it's majority here. If two of them, this one would have to go up, these two would have to come down, so they all go down. And the flags are in the inside. That's a quarter note, two eighth notes, so it would be 1. It would be and 2. So this one would equal 2 of those. Okay. And if I'm going too fast or you guys need clarification on anything, you have any questions, as always comment below and I'll get back to it. Okay, so that's how you would count out the notes to determine the rhythm when you're playing. Now, if this was, for example, a 3/4, then it would be 3 beats in a measure and the quarter note would be 1 beat. If it was 4/4, it would be 4 in a measure, the quarter note would get the beat. If it was 6/8, there'd be 8 beats per measure and the 8th note would get the beat. So that's how you determine that. Okay, treble clef, bass clef. Now, I'll go over the notes within each. I'm sure you guys have all heard these mnemonic devices: E, G, B, D, F, F, A, C, E, G, B, D, F, A, C, E, G. Okay, these two correspond to the lines and spaces of the treble clef. These two correspond to the lines and spaces of the bass clef, so you have to memorize them. The first line is an E, then a G, then a B, then a D, then an F. The first space is an F, then an A, then a C, then an E. Same thing in the bass clef here. First line is a G, then a B, then a D, then an F, then an A. First space is an A, C, E, G. So you've heard every good boy does fine, and face, and green birds don't fly away, and all cows eat grass. So those help you to memorize the lines and spaces on the staff in the beginning. But as soon as you can, you want to get away from relying on that, because you don't, every note you see, you don't want to have to count up this memorization technique there. You don't want to have to count up all the time. It's very time consuming and it's not practical or economical. So what you want to do is get in the habit as soon as possible of memorizing the notes and their positions, so that immediately when you see that note, you know that's an F. When you see that one, you know that's a B. When you see that one, you know that's an F. When you see that one, you know that's a G. And you know that's an E. And you know that's an F there. You know that's a G. You know that's an E. I mean an F, E, G, D, C, C, B, C, D, E, and so on. So you just want to start memorizing them because it makes it a lot easier and faster. Okay, so those are the notes in the thing, in the staff. Now you might say, well, on a piano there are way more notes than can be encompassed within this thing here, and you are right. So what you do for those is, let me see if I can find an example. Okay, right here. you extend the staff with these lines going above it. Those are called ledger lines. And so they would go above and above the staff. You can have them below the treble clef. You can have them above the bass clef and below the bass clef. For those you want to memorize at least the first three above the treble, which would be, this last line here is an F, so this would be an A, a C, and an E. You want to memorize the three below. That's an E here. That's a D. So this is a C. This is an A. This is an F. FAC, ACE. The three above the bass clef. This is an A. This is a C, E, and G. And then the three below. If this is a G here, that would be an F. The space here would be an F. So you know this is an E. This is a C. This is an A. Okay? So you want to memorize at least those three, and then you can use those as your reference point. So the ones below, ACE, the bass clef, three above the bass clef, CEG, three below the treble clef, FAC, and then three above the treble clef, A, C, and E. Okay, and then there will be some overlap. For example, the middle C will be shared. Middle C could be in the bass, could be in the treble, and then below the middle C, technically everything below middle C is in bass clef, and everything above middle C is in treble clef. But sometimes for the purposes of being written in sheet music, and all sheet music is a way to organize the sounds of music into a systematic approach that can be understood universally by those who can read and understand music. It's just a way to organize. So you'll want to memorize these three, and then as you could probably guess, it might get out of hand if you have too many of these ledger lines going down. It might start to look unorganized and be hard to read. So what you'll see is this symbol 8VA. So if they put a note here, for example, on this A, and there's an 8VA next to it, it means to play that lower, one octave lower, or it could be 16VA, play it 2 octaves lower, because if you have to draw out 2 octaves worth of ledger lines, it gets, you know, unsightly and unruly after a while. So when you see that 8VA, that's what it means. We'll play it 1 octave above or below. But they'll use one note here on this ledger line, but you won't play it in that range on the keyboard. You'll play it according to this, which is an octave or 2 lower or higher. Okay, now the next thing so that's ledger lines, that's the spaces and the lines on the staff. The next thing I want to go over is how to know where you are. Let's say you're playing the piano. How do you know which octave you're in? Well, you could base it on middle C. Middle C would be here. And you will find that on the piano, and then, you know, 1 C above that, like this C here, would be an octave above that one, so that's how you know where you are. A C above that one would be 2 octaves up, or below would be 1 octave below. Okay, so that's how you know. You base it on middle C, and you use that as your reference point, and then you just go up octaves or down octaves. So if you're confused and you say, okay, well, I know that's a B, but which B is it? Well, base it on middle C. It's the B above middle C. So it's a 7th above middle C. And then what you also might want to do as you get better with and more practice, you'll start to recognize intervals. So you'll know that from this E, this F is a 2nd, this G is a 3rd. So you can start to read even faster that way by going off of intervals. Okay, so that covers so far, and I'm just summarizing to help myself remember what I covered. I did the clefs, the time signatures, how the notes will appear in terms of going up or down, the rule for when they have to go up or down, the most common notes you'll see, how to count out measures to know the rhythm to play. The next thing I'm going to do, I forgot to do, is rests. Every note has a corresponding rest value, so the whole rest looks like an upside down hat colored in, and you could think of it as like a hole in the ground that you fall in there. The half rest is a right side up hat covered in. A quarter rest looks like a Z with a C attached to it. An eighth rest looks like this. Like a 7 with a dot on it, and then a 16th rest is 2 of those, and then so on. 32nd rest would be 3 of them, and so on there. Just like the way that you add flags, you would add those on. So those are the rests you'll see. I guess while I'm doing that, I can cover dotted notes. If you see a note like this with a dot next to it, that means play it for the value of this plus half. So half of a quarter note is an eighth note, so this one would be played for the duration of a quarter note and an eighth note. So when you see a dot, it just means add on half the value of the note that it's next to. So a dotted eighth note would be an eighth note plus a 16th note, and you'll see those sometimes in sheet music. Okay, now the next thing I'll go over, because we're using a Joplin rag here. When you see 2 of the exact same notes joined together with this little symbol called a tie, that doesn't mean play that note twice. That means you're only going to play it once, but you're going to play it for the duration that it's notated here. So you see an eighth note is tied to a 16th note. So this usually signifies a syncopation, and a syncopation just means stressing an offbeat. So for example, there are on beats, the 1 and the 2, those are on beats for this 2/4. And then the ands and everything following those are off beats. So to stress an offbeat is to syncopate it. So you would hold this one longer than these, and you'd bring it out a little more. And generally in ragtime, the left hand does a very strict, keeps a very strict beat, usually at eighth notes, 1 and 2 and then the right hand has the melody that's syncopated. And when those are contrasted by one another, that gives ragtime its signature sound. So as you can see here, this of the 1 beat, where this syncopated note comes in, is the offbeat. So that's why it's the of the first beat, it's off the beat, so it's syncopated. Okay, now if you see this same symbol and there are different notes connected with a symbol, that means that that's called a slur, and that means that they want a more legato feel as opposed to staccato. So again, what you can get from that, 2 of the same notes with one of these, that's a syncopation, and different notes with one of those, that's called a slur. Like right here, for example, those are 2 different notes, and you see that symbol, that means those are supposed to be legato. Okay, so I've covered that. I've covered the ledger lines, which extend the staff to be able to include more notes that aren't contained within here. I've covered the AVA, octave symbol, ties and slurs. Okay, how to count how to divide measures according to the time signature. Now I want to go over key signatures more. Okay, so There are flat key signatures. There are sharp key signatures. This is a symbol for a flat. Sharp is like a pound sign. Natural would be that. And then double flat would be 2. And double sharp would be an X, I believe. Now these are called accidentals. And what they do is they alter a note by either raising it up or dropping it down or returning it to its natural position. And as I mentioned in my last video, when you raise something up, you sharp it, and when you lower something to the left, you flat it. Okay, so this key signature will always be between the time signature and the clef. So what it does is it tells you what key the piece that you're playing is in based on the scales. So you have, as I mentioned before, you have to memorize your scales so that you know when you see, what you want to be able to do is when you see 3 flats, you want to know that that's either E flat major or C minor. Now this is getting a little advanced, but every major key has a relative minor key, and every minor key has a relative major key. And why that's important is because they share the key signature. So this can either be E flat major or it can be C minor. They share the key signature, and the way that you would determine which one it is you would have to analyze the structure of the music and see, the chord structure and what appears to be the home chord or home note and what the piece ends on. So let's say this has an E flat major chord appearing a lot throughout the piece, and it seems to be the home chord. Then you can it's fair to say that it would be E flat major. If it has a C minor chord that appears to be the home chord, and the chord that the piece is built upon, then you can guess, it's a fair guess to say that it would be C minor. So what you have to know is that when you see a key signature, it could either be one of 2 things, and that's how you determine which one it would be. Now, how do you find, let's say you start on E flat. To find a relative minor to any major key, you just go down 3 half steps, and that's the minor. So from E flat, 3 half steps down would be C, and then vice versa. To find a relative major from a minor, you start on, let's say, C minor, and you just go up 3 half steps, and that E flat, and that would be the relative major. Now, if you have your scales memorized, it's a lot easier because you know the flats already. This A, within the key of E flat, we're just going to focus on the major for ease of instruction. So in the key of E flat major, you have an A flat, a B flat, and an E flat. Those are the 3 flats. So what that means is that any of those 3 notes that you encounter in this piece, unless otherwise notated, are going to be flats. So if you see an A written in here, it's going to be flat. If you see a B written, it's going to be a B flat. If you see an E written, it's going to be an E flat. Okay, and that holds true for the whole piece, and that's why this key signature is important to know, because it tells you what scale you're going to be using and what the notes are going to be. If you played a B in here and it wasn't notated by a natural, it would be incorrect and it would sound incorrect. So you need to pay attention to this. I'll come back to the key signature. I just want to point this out. This is a B and you see a natural sign next to it. So this B is not going to be a B flat because it's otherwise notated by this symbol, which means that you play a B natural. Okay? And these accidentals